This is a story about two railroads. The Soo Line and the Minneapolis Northfield and Southern. Both have their headquarters in the Twin Cities. And the Soo is about to buy the MN&S in a $6 million cash-for-stock transaction. All that's needed is ICC approval of the acquisition, and that process begins in Washington over the next few days. With 4,400 miles of track and 3 important border connections with railroads in Canada, the Soo is certainly a major railroad. But as the 16th largest, it really isn't one of the industry giants either. The Soo's main line runs roughly west and north from Chicago to points on the Canadian border. It slices through the Twin Cities on the way. The MN&S has only about 70 miles of track, and that includes spurs and switch yards. Its main line runs south from Crystal, down through the western suburbs of Minneapolis into Savage, past Lakeville, and ends up in Northfield. Another line cuts up through the industrial corridor of Bloomington to the south edge of Minneapolis. It is one of the smallest railroads in the upper Midwest, and one of the few that has remained privately owned. It has also been one of the most profitable, but that wasn't always the case. Back in 1906, Marion W. Savage and a group of Minneapolis investors offered stock in a new railroad to be called the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and Dubuque Electric Traction Company. Savage was a prosperous feed and grain merchant, and he also owned the legendary pacer Dan Patch. In short order, his railroad was known as the Dan Patch Electric Line. Savage had pledged that the new railroad would be profitable throughout his lifetime. But in 1918, within hours after the death of his beloved racehorse, Savage himself passed away. Within a year, the Dan Patch line was sold in a bankruptcy auction. Automobile dealer Harry Pence wound up as the new owner, and the railroad was reorganized as the Minneapolis, Northfield, and Southern. Despite Savage's grand plans, rail was never laid beyond that southern Minnesota town. From 1918 on, the Pence family continued to control the railroad, right up to today. And from 1942, it is operated solely as a freight line. Under the prevailing federal regulations, the MN&S, along with some other short-line railroads, found a profitable and protected little niche for themselves. Tom Beckley is president of the Soo Line, and he tells us how little railroads like the MN&S survived.
There were some other railroads like it, but it established itself as a shortcut between the roads to the west of Minneapolis and those south and east of Minneapolis as a method for avoiding what used to be an extensive period required for the interchange of freight through the terminals of the various railroads in the Twin Cities area. And over the years, the M&S was able to reduce perhaps 2 or 3 days off the time it took freight to move from, say, the west coast to the east, because it had a very simple transfer operation which avoided all of the yards.
During those years, the ICC had regulations which protected short-line railroads that carried intermediate traffic, shipments that they neither originated nor terminated. And because of the way the shipping rates were divided between carriers, those short lines often received revenues disproportionate to the distance they hauled the freight. It was a sweet arrangement that went sour with the deregulation of the railroad industry during the Carter administration.
The deregulation puts the intermediate carrier in a bind in terms of his power to negotiate rates as against the originating or terminating carrier. And as a result, through route cancellations, through pressure on rate matters, it is possible for the longer haul carriers effectively to squeeze out the short lines.
And if that weren't enough, a wave of mergers created some super railroads which further weakened the MN&S position. The combined forces were too much to counter. For decades, the Minneapolis, Northfield, and Southern had been one of the most profitably efficient railroads in the country. But in 1980, it plunged into red ink. During the past 2 years, it posted operating losses of roughly $1 million. It was a stunning turnaround and put the MN&S in contact with the Soo Line. The Soo and the MN&S already have switching connections here at the Humboldt Yard in North Minneapolis. From here, traffic is routed east and west on the Soo's main line. The proposed acquisition will give the Soo new access to shippers south of Minneapolis. And there she goes, the Minneapolis, Northfield, and Southern. Too valuable to abandon, too small to survive alone.